Albertan independence, Tucker Carlson, a truck full of dead ducks, and one of the largest data leaks in Canadian history. Sit down and strap in, because these are just some of the pieces of this truly insane story that has been coming out over the last week, centered around the Centurion Project. To understand how all these factors really fit together, we first need to talk about how elections are actually won in 2026. Historically, to campaign for office, all you would need to do is find a group of people that resonates with your message, give them a little bit of training so that they know where exactly you stand on all the policies, give them some t-shirts with your name on them, and send them out on the town to preach your gospel. The two main ways that voter outreach would be conducted is phone calls and door knocking. But these days, people are a little bit more weary with any kind of unsolicited contact.
There is someone at the door, and I don't know them. Stranger, danger.
But what if instead it was your neighbor, or your hockey coach, or your father-in-law, somebody that you already have an existing relationship with, someone that there's enough social pressure that you're gonna not only respond to, but maybe even be convinced by? This is essentially the logic behind the Centurion Project.
So what is the Centurion Project? Well, if you sign up at thecenturionproject.ca, one of our Centurions, we now have 500, will contact you and get you onboarded. Onboarded means you go on to our website, you log in, and you search for the people you know, and you claim them. That's it. And then you will have a list of who you know, and then the only thing we ask you to do with that is survey them and find out if they support independence or not. That's it. And once you've identified that, you keep that list, and once we get close to the referendum, your job is to get them to vote.
The purpose of this is that by October 18th, we've got 1.5 million yes votes. We know where they are. We know how to reach them through you, so that on the morning of October 19th, you get on your phone, you talk to your 10, you say, you get out and vote. And your 10 talk to their 10, get out and vote. And we will know the day before the election what the result's going to be, because we've got the best organization in the province.
When you look at the graph and you hear these guys talk about it, it kind of starts to have the same energy as getting like an unsolicited Facebook message from someone you haven't talked to since high school who's now trying to sell you life insurance. Got sort of this 10-person structure and this idea that if I bring in 10 people and they bring in 10 people, then I basically 100x'd my vote, right? Or 10x'd my vote. Everything that I just said about an MLM, I also just want to posit that he does have a response to this allegation, and I'd like you to listen very, very closely to it.
You can't see who they've claimed. It's not a multi-level marketing company. You don't get points for how many people you've signed up. It's your list. It belongs to you. Okay? None of the admins, nobody who has control of the site, nobody in Alberta can see who you've claimed.
And look, technically, he is right. There is no product being sold, no one's buying inventory, and there is no commission structure here. I don't know if not being able to see who is actually that you've, claimed within this system is a valid mark of this not being an MLM, but I digress. But did you notice how strongly he stressed that no one in Alberta can see who's on your list? Where exactly did this software come from?
The people that created this technology, I met them on the Tucker Tour in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they were a sponsor. They put $50,000 into the VIP so that they could promote their app. And when I first heard about it, I was so blown away that I used every piece of social capital that I had with Tucker to get him to endorse it on stage.
And so I did hear of something really cool today. I've never done anything like this, but I'm going to do it now. There's actually a website in the state of Michigan where you can find people who probably would vote for the candidate you're voting for, but don't vote. And you can look them up. The voter rolls are right there. It's called 10X Votes. And you can go on there and just contact people you know and be like, hey, by the way.
And Tucker Carlson was not the only high-profile shout-out for this tool.
10xvotes.com. Get out there, kick ass, stop the New World Order, save our children's future.
Here is the current U.S. ambassador to Canada also shouting it out at a Trump rally in Michigan.
One other thing I want you to take a look at. Remember this. 10x votes.
10x Votes is really at the core of this story because 10x Votes is the technology that ended up powering the Centurion Project. And 10X Votes was co-founded by
Drew and Drew Born and Drew Weirda have been involved in politics their entire life. Drew Weirda is Eric Prince's nephew, and Drew is J.C. Heisinger's stepson. The Drews got together because they were sick of losing and wanted a better America for their young families, and are working on getting apathetic Christians and hunters out to vote.
Drew is a young man, avid hunter, and he noticed that a lot of his hunting friends were not voting consistently, and they were all conservatives.
This is a man whose commitment to the elimination of waterfowl runs so deep that it was one of his kids' first words. So, listen, I promised you that there was going to be a truck full of dead ducks, and look, here I am, delivering. For you, my dear viewer. All for you.
And so, with the help of some data gurus and, computer scientists, they were able to launch this 10X Votes program, which quite simply is a database of all of the low propensity voters. These are conservatives in Michigan who only vote 50% of the time or less. So they've been able to identify them and put them in a database that we call 10xvotes.com. And individuals at no charge can go to that website, 10xvotes.com, and search for family, friends, neighbors, people from church.
So the idea is simple. You can vote 10 times as long as you can convince 10 of your closest friends and family to come with you to the polls. But the key thing here is that 10X Votes is in Michigan, and in Michigan, the voter roll information is available by request. It's going to tell you if they had voted recently or not. Drew and his team would have presumably built this app legally with that kind of data. But it does seem like Drew has a bit of a laissez-faire approach to data privacy.
Everyone's like, oh, you're just data harvesting. We have their data. We have their addresses. We know who they are. We have their cell phone. We have their, I don't care. If I show up at the door, it doesn't make a difference, right? That's not going to get them to vote. If you call them, if you text them, they show up. We win.
And you know what?
He endorsed it on stage. They tracked what he did, like how many people signed up, and it resulted in 86,000 people who were non-voters, so people who voted less than 50% in elections voting. And if you go look at the margin that Trump got, it was not very far off that in Michigan.
David Parker was so inspired by this concept that he worked with 10X Votes to create a white-labeled web app that used their software, and he called his version the Centurion Project. However, my dear viewer, the important thing to note is that Alberta is in fact not Michigan, and here, there's no way of actually seeing who voted or did not vote. Moreover, there's no way of actually seeing who all the voters are, unless you're a political party, but there's pretty stringent rules that you're supposed to abide by in order to access it. Yet, during an online training session, Centurion organizers demonstrated their new app by plugging in and displaying the private home information of former Premier Jason Kenney. And it was not just him. It turns out that they had uploaded the private voter information of nearly 3 million Albertan onto this completely unsecure app. And just this morning, another article came out that said that at least 3,000 of the names on the Albertan voter roll were accessible from a subpage on the 10X Votes domain. And all you needed to do to see these was just sign up with an email. You don't even need to verify the email. You just needed to put an email in there and a password. That's it. One of the questions at the core of this video is how did this American MAGA tool get populated with the Albertan voter roll? If you're watching this realistically, you probably already know, but I feel like the true story runs so much deeper than a lot of the articles are alleging. This is the story of David Parker and Cameron Davies. David Parker is a fascinating critter. He's kind of like the Wilhelm scream. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And now that you know this, you're going to hear it everywhere because it's in so many movies and TV shows. And David Parker is very, very similar in that he's kind of been hiding in plain sight this entire time. But if you didn't know to look for him, you probably wouldn't have noticed him. I also just want to say here that I disagree with David on almost everything, but it's very clear from the sheer quantity and consistency of content that he is constantly pumping out. And this is tweets, Substack, podcast appearances, town halls. This man is always yapping, but he's very, very consistent with his viewpoint. And I think that he genuinely 100% believes everything that he's preaching. Do I agree with it? No. But do I respect it? Honestly, yeah, I kind of do. Because I think this belief, this deep-rooted belief, is what not only makes him so effective, but it is why he is genuinely dangerous. I'm about to go on a bit of a tangent, so if you want to just skip this bit, feel free to go to the time link on screen. I am sure that just by saying that I respect this man, I have just unleashed a bunch of comments that are going to tell me that I'm a separatist, or I'm somehow co-signing all of his viewpoints because I said that, or like, how can I respect someone that leaked everybody's data? And like, to this, I just want to preemptively respond that I really, really, really hate that there has been this dichotomization of anything with politics. This idea that everything is black and white or good and evil, and this idea that I can't just agree with one thing that one person said without co-signing everything they've ever done. I personally don't believe that, and I really, really hate that it feels like this is where we're at politically. And ironically, that is really what David is good at. He's really good at making everything good and evil, black and white. And like, I just feel like I don't see the world that way. Whoop. I don't see the world that way. I see the world in shades of gray. And by that, I mean, it's not like I don't have my own viewpoints. I definitely do, and I'm sure that they will come out throughout this video and all of the content that I make. That's just kind of how things go. But ultimately, I strive to understand people and their motivations. I am so fascinated by people just as a concept and the multitudes that we all contain. And this is kind of why I like and why I want to make these long-form videos. Before this, I was actually making like little TikTok-style bites in the news for a friend's project called True North Network, not to be confused with the True North News. Very, very different. But what I found when I was doing this is it's just so difficult to compress all of the nuance that really comprises so many of these stories into the bite-sized chunk of like a minute and a half. So yeah, that's kind of how we got here. I just found this to be such a concerning way of articulating such complicated points. And moreover, like, there are people that I very much disagree with that I think sometimes make a good point. Here's another example.
I go around universities and have challenging conversations, and because that's what is so important to our country, is to find our disagreements respectfully, because when people stop talking, that's when violence happens. We record all of it so that we put on the internet so people can see these ideas collide. When people stop talking, that's when you get violence. That's when civil war happens, because you start to think the other side is so evil and they lose their humanity.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And now let's talk about David Parker and the childhood that shaped him.
So, as has been noted, my name is David John Parker. I was born in Lacombe, Alberta. For those who don't know where Lacombe is, it's just a little bit north of Red Deer. It's a small place, 20,000 people. My dad's the pastor of the Haines Community Church. Don't feel bad if you don't know where Haines is. There's 8 houses in Haines, so not very many people know where it is. And my mom is a homeschool facilitator.
Based on everything I know about David now, which is frankly way too much for me to know about any human being, if I had to summarize his childhood in 3 words, I would say bitches, Bible, and books. Bitches, because the family actually raised these adorable Habermas puppies. And I think you not only deserve to see this, but you deserve to see these pictures of childhood David that are still active and live on the internet. Bible, for perhaps obvious reasons, but also because he claims to have read it like multiple times and even memorized the entire book of Romans, which might be the source of his love of Rome, which does come up a lot across his content. And I mean, we are talking about the Centurion Project, so, you know. And books.
My mom read 200 books to me before I was 12 years old. And she instilled in me a lot of ideas by reading those books. I'm not talking about like Cat Sat on the Mat books, right? I'm talking about like Narnia and The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And all of these stories, they had heroes who had a mission, they had a purpose, they had a place that they were trying to go. They knew why they were there. They had a mission, a quest, right?
The role of these stories in his upbringing really helps us understand why his description of things is always so apocalyptic. He really does position everything as this existential us versus them, and very, very intensely so. When a journalist asked him if he was trying to create a new Jerusalem on the prairies, referencing his very evangelical upbringing, he said, and this is real, I wouldn't say Jerusalem, I would say Gondor. In his own mythology, the search for a meaningful quest is actually what led him to explore becoming a lawyer. And I think this clip is really key to understanding him.
And what I came to realize was lawyers interpret the law. And I want to be clear on something here. The law is made by us, right? We've forgotten that. We seem to think that the law is something that our bosses make, right? That the politicians make, and we just have to listen. The politicians are supposed to be our servants, right? They're supposed to serve the people, not some agenda. Like, they're supposed to be representing us. And so I decided I wanted to be the one that was representing the people and making the law as opposed to the one interpreting the law. So I was like, 13 years old, I'm going to be Prime Minister.
His mother took him to his first AGM at 14, and during that meeting, they actually appointed him as VP, which was like 4 years before he could even vote. Fun fact, this happened in Wetaskiwin. And as soon as I read the word Wetaskiwin, you know what little jingle popped up into my head? So this position was very important to him because it actually allowed him to go to the first ever conservative conference. And when I say first ever conservative conference, I feel like I need to put a little asterisk by that, because we have had conservative parties in Canada for many, many moons. But this was the first year after the Progressive Conservatives and the Alliance came together and formed the Modern Conservative Party. It was a big moment for Canada, and it was an even bigger moment for young David Parker.
And then the crowd starts chanting, Harper, Harper. Like, I'm talking like they were going wild. It was very loud. Harper comes walking down the middle of the aisle, he's pointing at people, giving high fives. It's like a big, celebration. People were pretty excited about him. And then he came and sat down right beside me. But you know what's funny? That when they started chanting Harper, you want to know what the first thing that went through my mind was? I hope one day they're chanting Parker.
The very next year, Harper would be elected for the first time, which would mark the beginning of his 10-year rule in federal politics. At the same time this was happening, David Parker was continuing his journey as a young man and chose to go to Trinity Western University. So Trinity Western University is actually Canada's first and largest evangelical university. I personally had no idea that existed, but now I know, and you do too. And Trinity Western could honestly support an entire deep dive of its own.
One day, as members of the founding community were walking through the field behind me, one man stopped and began removing his shoes. When asked what was he doing, he simply replied, "I'm taking my shoes off because I believe that I'm walking on holy ground."
Community Covenant requires students refrain from sexual intimacy that violates the sacredness of marriage between a man and a woman.
Which I'm sure the students really did adhere to. Now, Trinity Western also provided a very unique opportunity for the young aspiring politician, because it had a school called the Laurentian Leadership Center, which was a building that they'd purchased in Ottawa where kids could go and do a semester and really get involved on the ground.
I like to say that the LLC is the unknown superpower in Ottawa, or at least it was back in the Harper days. A little less so with the Liberals being in power, but still a force to be reckoned with. So.
And he's not exaggerating there. I found multiple articles from those days talking about how this little campus was placing a ton of kids into the political system. After he graduated, he followed in the footsteps of men before him and got a job in the Harper government. Right away, he started to find his voice and articulate his perspective on the issues that mattered most to him. One of his first notable moments was a scathing letter to the editor in the Lacombe Globe, aggressively blasting Premier Alison Redford's progressive homeschool policy changes. Unfortunately, the article itself seems to have been lost to time, but according to David's own Facebook, it included the quote, "This comes straight from the bowels of the teachers' union." And what was this aggressively progressive proposition? Well, it was that all curriculum must reflect the diverse nature and heritage of society in Alberta and promise understanding and respect for others and honor and respect the common values and benefits of Albertans, which, oh my God, what a sentence, as well as must not promote or foster doctrines of racial or ethnic superiority or persecution, social changes through violent action, or disobedience of laws. However, David really positioned his opposition to this through the lens of freedom.
Number one issue for parents is their rights. The rights over their children. Children belong to their parents.
I don't think we're allowed to own people anymore, but...
It does not matter what the law says. That's what God says. And it is the biological reality. Children are created by their parents. If we do not hold firm on parents being the sole authority, the biggest authority in their children's lives, then the state will take our children.
And, fun fact, the first time that he actually used the term Centurion in reference to mobilizing TBA for parental rights. But I'm getting way, way, way ahead of myself here. Because back in 2012, he was not alone in publicly speaking out about this bill. And apparently the backlash to the proposed legislation was so strong, it elicited responses from homeschooling groups south of the border. And on the home front, this criticism was being amplified by a relatively new, kind of, political party called the Wildrose, now led by a woman named Danielle Smith. So a little context about the Wildrose Party. It was basically the Albertan version of the Tea Party movement from the States, except make it Canadian, and an actual political party. It would later merge with the Progressive Conservatives and form the United Conservative Party that we see today. Now, this letter to the editor that David wrote actually garnered in an invite to join Danielle Smith's War Room campaign for that year's election, which is where she was running against their mutual op, Alison Redford. This is a pivotal moment for David, as not only would the friendship he developed with Smith during this time later play a massive role in getting her elected, he also got a front row seat to one of the world's first social media elections. Now, this wasn't the first year that social media was a thing, but it was definitely when things were starting to become a little bit more mainstream. And going to the polls, it really did look like the Wildrose was going to win in a decisive victory. However, there had been a series of faux pas that were then amplified online that led to them losing. One of these was the absolutely iconic, and if it happened now, would have been absolutely hilarious moments when the image of Danielle Smith on her campaign bus was unfortunately aligned with the wheels of the vehicle. I will show this on screen. One less hilarious moment was the resurfacing of a candidate's blog from the previous year that said gays would suffer the rest of eternity in a lake of fire. And that lake of fire line got a lot of attention, and even this entire election cycle is now sometimes referred to as the lake of fire election. But I would be remiss, dear viewer, if I did not tell you that the blog started with the words, "I have decided to do a sequel to Lady Gaga's CD Born This Way. My CD would be entitled Born This Way, and that's why Jesus came." But 2012 was just a simpler time. This is back in the they go low, we go high era, although that actually came a couple years later. So this predates that. But like one of the largest scandals in Canada that year was Juicegate. When MP Bev Oda resigned after it came out, she spent $16 on orange juice and $4,500 on limos and a fancy hotel room instead of just staying in the same hotel provided by the conference she was attending. And these were, of course, taxpayer dollars. She was also charged $250 for smoking in a non-smoking room. And fun fact, this was not the first nor the second time she'd been caught billing the taxpayer for limousines. Also, she looks just as ballin' as you'd think she'd be. Now why, dear viewer, am I telling you this? A, because it is objectively hilarious, and these are the kind of tidbits that make all of this worth it. And B, because I think it's easy for us to forget just how far the Overton window of acceptable behavior has shifted over the last 15 years. Because, spoiler alert, things were a-changin', and the concept of decorum was about to fall rapidly out of favor, and David's experience in this contentious campaign was about to become a hell of a lot more relevant in the political landscape. It's hard to find an approximate proxy for this, but I think this graph showing the frequency of swear words by politicians on Twitter helps illuminate the abrupt shift that happened around 2016-2017. I wonder what happened there. David Parker worked for a lot of the most powerful people in Canadian politics. He'd worked for Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney, Danielle Smith, Rona Ambrose, Ed Fast, Aaron O'Toole. He'd been in the room for a lot of these really big moments. And yet, he's actually never run for office himself. In fact, he often goes out of his way to stress.
And I'm not a politician. I just want to make that clear. I'm a private citizen.
Although now I think that might mostly be for legal reasons. His LinkedIn says mobilizer, but the word kingmaker has been used more often than not to describe him. But I would argue that Kingbreaker is a far more fitting moniker to describe dear David. Now, here is a fun little example. In November 2019, Andrew Scheer lost the federal election to Trudeau. At the same time, David starts working on the O'Toole leadership campaign to usurp him. He creates a group called Conservative Victory to pressure Scheer to resign. He also helped set up a companion group literally called Scheer Must Go, or noun the verb. He staged a walkout of Scheer's speech at the annual convention. And less than a month later, Scheer resigned. That same day, David allegedly sent a text saying, "And that is how you take down a leader." In the leaked exchange, David is repeatedly characterized as an assassin, a moniker he would later kind of lean into. After this exchange, David claims he was uninvited to the O'Toole victory party, although I think the message that says Aaron will do what I tell him may have played more of a role in all of that than, the statements about being an assassin. By the end of this era, from the outside, David Parker is seemingly killing it. He's made some enemies, but he's made far more friends, and he's worked for the Modern Miracle Network. Spoiler alert, the Modern Miracle is, of course, hydrocarbons. This is essentially big oil incarnate. And he was even appointed on the board of the prestigious Canadian Deachech Foundation. I'm just going to keep it. I cannot say that word. And through this, he claims to know fellow Lord of the Rings stands Peter Thiel's chief of staff quite well. But on the inside, he's not doing so great.
Aaron O'Toole kicked me out of his entire operation. I wasn't even invited to his victory party. So I got pretty bitter at politicians, and then I got pretty depressed. And at the time, I was an alcoholic.
So what do you do when you lose your conviction? Well, of course, you move to Ontario and you start a roofing business. But then the pandemic happens, and he describes himself moving back home, a broke and broken man.
Chinese health authorities are still working to identify the virus behind a pneumonia outbreak in the central city of Wuhan.
At least 59 people are believed to have been sickened by the new virus.
Tonight, U.S. airports on high alert, screening passengers for symptoms of a deadly new virus.
What I remember most of all was just the uncertainty of it all. What started with 2 weeks to stop the spread stretched into months and months and months. And the reasoning people were getting for all of this just didn't really feel sufficient for the sheer impact of the event. You're telling me that a single pangolin from Wuhan is enough to KO the entire global economy? And the things that were supposed to make us make sense of this were only really making it worse. Big tech was restricting speech online, which fed this underlying feeling that there was something they weren't telling us. And the Trudeau government's weirdness about the Winnipeg Disease Lab and the Chinese scientists added just a whole nother layer of what the fuck? They actually refused to release documents to Parliament, which then was found to be a breach of parliamentary privilege. And this refusal was so contentious, it contributed to the snap election we had in 2021 at the height of the pandemic. And our saviors were supposed to be the pharmaceutical companies racing to find a cure, which is not exactly a group that had a deep reservoir of public trust to draw from. There's this concept in political science called the death of deference, the idea that people stopped automatically trusting experts' intuitions and governments during this time. This sentiment had been building for years, but the pandemic compressed decades of erosion into months. In Alberta specifically, all of this was compounded by a premier who could just not pick a fucking lane. Because Jason Kenney's approach to managing the crisis was not great, just to put it lightly. And more than anything else, it was deeply inconsistent. He seemed to try to please everyone, and in doing so, did not please anyone. A Ledger poll from November 2020 showed 59% of residents were dissatisfied with his response to this crisis, which was somehow 10% worse than how the same respondents felt about the Trudeau government's response. And then came the Open for Summer fiasco of 2021. He announced his vaccine passport program weeks after publicly declaring his government would never ever consider one. So now we've got a province full of people who are scared, who are angry, and they feel like the answers they're giving just don't add up, who are watching their premier contradict himself every few weeks, and who are increasingly connecting with each other online because they cannot do it in person. And in times of uncertainty, people tend to turn to religion. Of course, large gatherings, such as a congregation, were restricted.
The pastor of a church in the Edmonton area is under arrest for violating public health orders, repeatedly holding sermons that exceed Alberta's capacity limits.
This church near Edmonton has repeatedly violated public health orders, holding sermons that surpass the 15% gathering capacity. Coates has been charged with breaching the Public Health Act and is due in court at the end of March.
And for the first time in a long time, people were actually angry enough, bored enough, and engaged enough to do something about it.
If in the communist country of Cuba, churches are open and we are jailing our pastors, what is happening to us?
This was the moment that David Parker was made for.
My creed is very simple. I have one rule. Don't mess with my friends. I usually use a different word. Underneath that, of course, is an even deeper rule. Never mess with my family, right? And when you arrest pastors, you're messing with both my friends and my family. And so then it's very simple. Now you've violated my one rule. Now I must act in a way that will show people that rule cannot be violated without consequence.
So, in December 2021, he incorporated Take Back Alberta and stepped out of the shadows and onto the stage. Admittedly, a series of very small stages at first: church basements, community centers, small towns across the province. But his timing could not have been better, because in a few weeks, the convoy happened.
After vaccine mandates for cross-border truckers were imposed in January by Canada and the United States, a so-called Freedom Convoy was organized in protest. Truck drivers traveled across Canada to Ottawa, then parked themselves downtown in a show of solidarity. The protests have expanded to oppose government restrictions more generally against unvaccinated people and include signs like "Vaccines don't save people, Jesus saves people." 2 border blockades, one in Ontario and one in Alberta, are disrupting hundreds of millions of dollars in Canada-US trade, ranging from cattle to car parts.
Interestingly, David Parker actually never made it to Ottawa, but he did attend the blockade in Coutts, Alberta, where he met people who would later become the initial backbone of Take Back Alberta. This included Marco van Hugenbus. Man, I wish I was better at saying words. A town councillor in Fort Macleod who'd been charged with mischief over 5K due to his role in the blockade. Marco would become TBA's CFO. In a very, very important role, because TBA was registered as a third-party elections advertiser. For those unfamiliar, as I was, a third-party advertiser is kind of like Canada's version of a PAC, or like a political action committee. They can raise money and they can spend it on political advertising, but they're not supposed to be coordinating directly with a party or running candidates. They're supposed to be independent. That's why they're called third parties. And to prove it, they need to file financial reports with Elections Alberta. But this legal structure was really just the shell. What TBA actually was is a machine for organizing the grassroots activists who shared David's worldview to empower people to get involved, to hold politicians accountable, to stack ridings association boards, to control who gets nominated, to demand loyalty from leadership, and if leadership doesn't reply, replace them. There are genuine grievances in rural Alberta about being ignored, talked down to, and governed by people that don't understand their lives. I made my first video about this, and David Parker not only tapped into it, but was able to weaponize it effectively.
Something truly extraordinary is happening in Alberta. A prairie fire has been lit, the likes of which the world has never seen.
And he had a 4-phase plan. Phase 1, Jason Kenney. Which is ironic, because David helped him win his contentious leadership race back in 2017. But that was before the church closures, before the pastors, and before this betrayal. So he used TBA's political machine to do what it was built to do. They organized, they showed up at the AGM, and they stacked the board. And this was basically the beginning of the end for Jason Kenney. They forced a leadership review, and although he technically did survive it,
TBA had everyday Albertans saying WTH after this happened.
While 51% of the vote passes the constitutional threshold of a majority, it clearly is not adequate support to continue on as leader. And that is why tonight I have informed the president of the party of my intention to step down as leader of the United Conservative Party.
And this was a huge win for David and TBA. This was their first real proof of concept. Now, with Jason Kenney gone, stage 2 is they needed a replacement. They needed to elect a freedom-valuing, grassroots-led premier, supported by the grassroots UCP board. Enter Danielle Smith. So after the election where they met each other in 2012,
I tendered my resignation as Wildrose leader and notified the Speaker that 9 members of the Wildrose caucus, including myself, will be joining the government caucus.
That's right. The majority of the province's official opposition has decided to join the government.
She'd been more part of the political establishment and could become a viable candidate. And they organized, they mobilized, and once again they won. For a time, David Parker seemed to have everything that he could have ever wanted. He'd broken the leader who betrayed him. He'd installed the leader he chose. This machine seemed to have worked. The grassroots had finally spoken, and the servants were now going to serve. He had risen, but after the rise comes the fall. And now in office, Smith did what politicians do. She realized she was accountable to more of the stakeholders than just Parker and his radical faction. The Sovereignty Act that was a backbone of her running became the Sovereign Alberta within a United Canada Act, trying to toe the line between separatism and federalism, which is a neat trick if you can pull it off, but that's really not what these true believers had signed up for.
She was elected by members on a Alberta sovereignty mission.
Yes, literally.
That was why she...
The Sovereignty Act.
Mm-hmm. Yes, not a sovereignty within the United Kingdom.
No, it wasn't called that when
she called that.
But still, David had his premier, and he moved into pushing for the policies that hit closest to his heart, starting with parental rights.
Anyone who teaches you that children should be castrated and made infertile, they are anti-human, and they must be stopped.
Interestingly, this doesn't seem to be a position that the premier herself was entirely on board with.
How can I be homophobic?
Chief of Staff is gay. David was a shrewd political navigator, and TBA had enough political credibility now to attract bigger names. He helped coordinate Jordan Peterson coming to talk to Danielle Smith, and he organized the Parental Rights Tour with controversial American doctor Lindsay.
What is queer theory for? I would tell you that it is literally designed to A, destabilize children. Number 2, it's to sever the link to their family. Number 3, it's to sever the link to their religion.
The last one actually got him kicked off the Deitchley Foundation board, which David attributed to council culture. But then things kind of started to unravel. Marco van Hugenbos, the CFO, the guy that David met at Coots, left.
The moment that he was on stage with Jordan Peterson, he thought he was at the height of his, that was such a defining moment for him, right? He was invincible. And I wasn't even at that event. I just couldn't see it. I don't think the event made any money. If anything, it lost money. Which how
David's
do you lose money?
what's known as a star fucker. He enjoys it.
Right. So that's exactly what happened. But very quickly, we started to have issues, and we started to have issues. We started to clash around the simple concept of accountability.
And after Marco's departure, TBA just stopped submitting their financial disclosures to Elections Alberta, period.
There are people at Elections Alberta, there are other agencies, especially since my revelations came to light, who are now going to take a very deep look and a careful look at all of the TBA finances.
By February 2025, Elections Alberta hit Parker and TBA with 12 separate penalties, overall about $120,000.
In an interview with City News, Parker says the fines are related to what he considers grassroots meetings.
There is a fundamental disagreement between myself and Elections Alberta on whether or not the meetings are elections advertising. And I've refused to say that they are. I could take the Elections Alberta to court. I could take the provincial government to court.
But by now, even Danielle was distancing herself. After some particularly salacious tweets, she told Parker publicly he needed to just get off Twitter, which maybe. And yet, here is the strange thing about David Parker. Even as everything appeared to be collapsing around him, he was still getting results. TBA still controlled the UCP board. They could still mobilize. After the notwithstanding clause was invoked, the parental rights policies he'd been pushing for over a decade actually passed. Please note that this affects less than 0.5% of the population. I digress. So the relationship with Smith wasn't entirely dead. It was toxic, but it was not dead. And in 2024, that relationship produced at least one more thing.
Tucker Carlson labeled an extremist by groups that monitor hate speech in the U.S., holding court at sold-out venues in conservative Alberta. In attendance,
Premier, thank you.
Alberta's premier, including the founder of Take Back Alberta, a grassroots group that helped Smith become premier.
Alberta is the heartland of conservatism in this country. It's the last stand against what we're up against, which is this totalitarian creep of socialism.
Through this tour that he would be introduced to the team of Tucker Carlson. And this was how David Parker would later meet the people who gave him the technology he needed to do what had been the accumulation of his life's work. David had the movement, he had the grassroots machine, he had a decade of political expertise, but what he did not have was a tool, a way to map every political voter in Alberta to know where they stood on the issues that matter and how to reach them through the people that they would actually listen to. But a tool is only as good as the data you feed it. We once again return to the core question. How did nearly 3 million Albertans' private information end up loaded onto the unsecure American app that anyone with an account could just access? Well, to truly answer that question, we now need to meet
my longtime friend, compatriot, brother in arms, and sometimes thorn in my side, Cameron Davies.
So, full disclosure, I'm right now in editing mode, and I've realized that because my camera went off like halfway through, the Cameron Davies section is going to take me another 10 years to edit unless I re-record everything. Because I do want to put this out now, and I also think that the quantum of information that has been coming out about this maybe requires a follow-up video regardless. I've decided I'm going to cut this in half, and I'm going to do Cam and updates in a separate video. So yeah, I'm really happy that we are at least halfway through this because, oh boy, there is just so much going on here. And Cam has so much more. And there's a lot of interconnections between him and David that I didn't really get into in this video. I was fully intending to put most of those in the Cam section, so I am aware of the ways that they have been connected in the past, and that will be elaborated more upon in this subsequent video. So yeah, if you stuck with me this long, first of all, thank you so much. I appreciate your attention span. And second of all, feel free to subscribe because I will be putting that video out there. So yeah, thank you so much. Bye. Centurion Project in question is not the critically acclaimed My Little Pony fan fiction of the same name. I bring this up because this fan fiction is 81 chapters long and an epilogue, and it ran for 7 years starting in 2019. To fully understand the scale of this was over 750,000 words. It is almost as long as the King James Bible itself. And the final chapter of this and the epilogue were actually posted on March 1st, 2026, which was 2 days after the domain for the Centurion Project was purchased. And I'm pretty sure it was before the website was even live, or at least before the Internet Archive captured it. Is this a coincidence? Probably, but the Lord works in mysterious ways, so you never really know.